Welcome to AI Negotiation Unlocked, the podcast where we explore how artificial intelligence is revolutionizing the way we negotiate. I'm Rosie Bailey, CEO of Nibble, the world's leading AI negotiation platform, and each episode I'll sit down with industry leaders to uncover how businesses can harness AI tools to scale negotiations, boost efficiency, and unlock new revenue opportunities. Now, let's begin. Thanks so much for joining me here today, David. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the AI Negotiation Unlocked podcast. For those of you who have not met David, he is one of procurement's most outspoken voices on the intersection of AI, supply chain, and negotiation. He has experience as CPO and Chief Supply Chain Officer for both public and private equity-owned companies. And I know you've spoken about implementing predictive procurement models and early AI negotiation pilots. So driving measurable improvements in supplier efficiency and prediction and being able to predict your costs. So thank you so much for joining me. At DPW Amsterdam 2025, you called for procurement to move from automation to intelligence. So I'm looking forward to discussing more about how leaders can transform decision-making, not just process efficiency, but using AI to really transform the way they work. You're known, I dare say, for your candid views and no-nonsense approach. You're a fast talker and a quick thinker. So we're all going to stay on our toes today. Thank you so much for joining me, David.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, Rosie, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Early AI negotiation pilots is something we've talked about, and you're very passionate about measurable improvements in supplier efficiency and cost predictions. We met again at DPW Amsterdam, and I know you were speaking on stage there about moving from automation to intelligence and really urging people to really adopt innovation, but in a sensible and ROI-driven way. So I'm really excited. You're very well known for your candid views and a no-nonsense approach. I'm excited about having a conversation. I think I'm going to learn a ton. So David, is there anything I've missed in your introduction? Just give us a tiny bit of background about yourself, and then we can go on to where you think that the industry's at today.
Sure. Well, that was a mighty kind introduction, and I hope, I do like to, express my point of view, and I'm always open to learning as well. So it's certainly open to pivoting and understanding what's going on in the market. But as you said, I think really today there's not a lot of room for, a lot of talk. As they say, talk is cheap. I think it's time to get into action. And I think that's what a lot of people in the industry are doing. And I'm really thrilled to be here to be able to, sort of give some of my observations. But the nice part is I will learn a lot too, even though it's just you and I'll learn from you, but I'll learn from people, that maybe take a listen to this and make comments or whatever, and maybe give me some more direction of where I should be spending more of my time.
Very excited, very excited. So from a high level perspective, like we were both at DPW a couple of weeks ago. It's one of a number of great conferences in the sector, but it's quite a nice time of the year to kind of come together and think, well, where have we got to during 2025? There's obviously been a huge set of advancements in technology again. Where do you think we are on that sort of hype adoption cycle? How do you think people in the real world are really feeling about the innovation that's available to them and that they've managed to do so far?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there are a lot of people that have expressed a lot of their point of views at DPW and elsewhere and so forth. The best way that I could probably describe it is, having been to many of, multiple DPWs and other conferences and speaking with many customers and my peers, is I think it's moved last year from, I'll call it curious exploration to strategic deployment. So I believe that people were, there last year to kind of go, what is this all about? Is this going to be real? Is this something that I really need to learn? Is it something that is going to, take up a lot of my day? Is it a sideshow? Is it under the main tent? I need to assess this for what it means to me and what it means to my business. And I think we're past that now. I think people realize this is real. Some people take it all the way to the next level of it's the next industrial revolution. And other people take it to, hey, it's going to help me automate some of those mundane tasks. So there's a spectrum. Maybe it's somewhere in between, but it's clearly going to be part of everybody's life. And I think people understand that, and they're trying to figure out where they can deploy it to help them in their business.
Did you see any good examples of people starting? What's the first move for many people in terms of how they feel like they need to start. I know everyone's at different stages of maturity,
Sure.
so maybe it's business dependent, but what examples have you seen recently that you thought, yeah, that's a good way to start?
Yeah, and I think some things don't change, Rosie, like in the business and in industry, and that is sort of the crawl, walk, run approach, right? I think people are starting with the lower risk applications. Um, and it's one thing like, you talk about, we'll talk about negotiation maybe at some point, because I know that's a passion of yours. And I think the biggest reason why negotiations fail, for instance, is lack of preparation. And there is no excuse in today's environment to be unprepared for anything because there's so many, items out there and so many assets and things that can help you be prepared. So what I've noticed is people are using it to take mundane tasks maybe and make, and offload those maybe to what I'll call their AI assistant. And then they're graduating more further. There's a lot of companies, as you probably saw there as well. A big theme now is intake and orchestration.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of risk there either. I mean, you're bringing a new supplier on. There might be risk in terms of how you're asking your company to utilize the systems and so on. But there's not a lot of data risk. There's not a lot of tremendous amount of, risk that you might cripple the business, let's say. So I think people are moving through those. People are doing, automated RFQs. They're
Yeah.
doing, certain negotiations and so on. The agentic AI thing that everybody talks about and is the ultimate, where everybody's going. I'm not sure there's a tremendous amount of deployment in that area, but I think there's a lot of preparation that will come in due course, and it won't be that long from now.
I think that's quite an interesting question. I get asked a lot. Can we have a negotiation co-pilot? Which goes very much to your point about preparation, right? And I see that as being very much like you have a chat with Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever is your preferred platform, and you literally ask it questions. I'm trying to prepare for a negotiation. What would you recommend I think about? And it might ask you questions, prompt you to find documents, prompt you to look up what you spent last year or what the market conditions are doing, or it may help you find those information by doing deep research. Um, but what I find interesting is all of that is available to you now, you know? And so when you talked about preparation, were you thinking about people using those platforms that you can use for free or through your corporate subscription to Google Gemini or something like that? Because I think that's so different from an agentic approach, which requires, frankly, tons of preparation, working out what rules you want it to keep within. And
You,
so yeah, so I do see that as a very different set of decisions. One you can do organically, like just by asking your workers to kind of adopt it a little bit and a little bit and get more comfortable with it. And the other is a whole scale, it's like an IT deployment, right?
yeah, no, it's a good point, and I think they are distinctly different. They're distinctly different, and I also think that as I made the observation about sort of last year, what it was like, and now strategic deployment, there still are a number of companies that seem as though they're not embracing the training and education of AI of their employees, and I really think that's important. And I'll tell you why I say that. Um, I think the best example to think about is people that may be skeptical say, well, it's dangerous, it could hallucinate. And some part of the population decides, I'm just going to stay away from it. And that's the wrong approach. And the reason why I say it's the wrong approach is take email, for instance. Email can be more dangerous than AI. Now, that's a big statement, but I'll explain to you why. I've seen it. If someone sends a phishing email to a company and they click on it, it can take the entire company down. Okay. But no one sits back and says, we better stop using email because it could take the entire company down. You know what they do? They
Yeah,
teach good
some
hygiene.
training.
They
Mm.
train people on email and train them to be able to find out or understand or identify what a phishing email is and to avoid it. The same thing needs to happen with AI. The training needs to be there. And once the training is there, then I think people are going to do great things with it. I think there's a term that I came across, not I think there is, the other day, and it's right. It's called AI shadowing. People are using AI no matter what, whether you ask them to or not. At
Yeah.
work, they're using it at home. So right now it's time to actually put some guardrails around it and train about it. And once you train on it, then it won't be like this mysterious item that everybody's afraid to talk about, either how they're using it or how they're not using it.
I also think some people, some very senior people I meet, are afraid to expose their own lack of knowledge and understanding, and because they haven't experimented with it. And I've experimented and found places it's not very good. And just to be clear, I run an AI company, but I'm not a technical person by background. Do you know what I mean? So when I say I've experimented with it, I'm doing things like writing emails, writing proposals, asking it to do research, and sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it doesn't work so well, like, and I think
Yeah.
it's actually it's so accessible that you can do these things. Is there anything you're doing at Westfall that along those lines that you want to share that you're proud of, that you're implementing in your team or in your organization?
Yeah. So, when I was at Westfall at a Blackstone portfolio company, we did a lot where Blackstone actually was a leader in trying to work with all their portfolio companies saying, how can we integrate AI? Because if you read anything about that organization, they're all about AI going forward, and they're doing a tremendous amount of work on AI. So as you talked about earlier, we have worked with AI autonomous negotiation bots. We've worked with and this is probably 3 or 4 years ago we started this
Yeah,
with,
before it was like quite so agentic.
right, that's correct, and automated RFQs and things like that. And the reason why I bring that up is people may have heard me say this before. In this market or this industry, I believe everything goes as fast as a dog year. Should be measured in dog years. So if every year is 7 years, we've been doing AI for 28 years now. As an
Fantastic.
analogy. It's really only 4 years, but using that analogy, it also is interesting what's happening, and it's fascinating because I believe, and everything I learned in business school was when it comes to marketing and things and product development, there's a first mover advantage. I think there's a first mover disadvantage in this field right now. So if you started your business 4 or 5 years ago, and it wasn't a quote unquote, and there's a lot of definitions about this, but if it wasn't an AI native platform, then you may need to blow that entire tech stack up and put a new tech stack in now so that you can pivot, you can plug and play with all these new developments that are coming out. Because if you can't, then I think you're going to be far, far behind. So we've done some interesting things, but I think at the same time, the amount of use cases and the amount of applications are going to go up dramatically because of what's out there today and the platforms that we can build off of.
And do you think, therefore, it'll be a world of best of breed or a world of just getting a really good global provider that you can get their solutions? So when you pick out like different solutions, let's say for RFQs or something like that, do you think you'll end up picking and choosing, or do you think you'll try and take everything from a central provider?
Yeah. That's a difficult question. I think that does matter where you stand in, the marketplace, an SME versus a large enterprise global company or whatever it is. But I do think things are converging into less than when I say best of breed, I don't think companies want to log into 9 different platforms anymore. I don't think that is really what's going to happen. And there's really no need to. When I see some of the newer items that are out there, it's moving more from a SaaS sort of environment to what is called an iPaaS environment, an integrated platform as a service. And there's a number of companies now, not too many, but some that are on the horizon now that are developing around what I think Gartner now calls BOAT. It's an acronym called BOAT, Business Orchestration and Automation Technologies. So I've seen these companies where you type into a very similar application like an LLM, but it's not an LLM. And it builds the scaffolding of several apps immediately, in full code for your organization. And that's about 70 or 80% of the app that it builds. And then it integrates specifically with one data layer. And then you're up and running across the organization. And if you're doing intake and then you want to move right to a bidding process, you can do that. You move right to a negotiation process. And I think what's key about that is not so much that it's amazing how all that's done, but I think the adoption around your organization accelerates dramatically because you don't have to know how to use each system. You're using natural language.
Fascinating. Yeah, no, yeah. I hadn't thought about it like that. And then I guess that's just a step towards some people are asking us now about what's beginning to be called agent to agent protocol. So the idea that Nibble is effectively it's a chatbot. Let's be plain English. Do you know what I mean? Like so at the end of the day, it needs to chat to your suppliers So you could log into a Nibble portal to do that, or you could just have your suppliers have a conversation with you wherever they have a conversation, and then for parts of the conversation, just ask Nibble to tell you what to say effectively.
Right.
And that strikes me as goodness, if that works, it'd be brilliant, right? Technology has a way of never been quite as simple as it sounds, but I can see how that really removes barriers. But at the end of the day, I think we do need consolidation, and I think it is scary for companies to have too many applications, is what you're saying.
Yes, and when you use the term consolidation, what comes to my mind is, I think I read a post the other day from Mr. James Mead, who in his organization, he implements procurement technology. And I think it said, I could be wrong, and if I am, I'm sure James will call me up and maybe correct me, but that I think he's following 420 companies right now.
Holy moly, wow.
So I call that, and again, another observation is there is a bit of sea of sameness out there. You walk around some of these events and you say, wow, this is kind of a sea of sameness. What is going on here? Now, let me make another observation based on that. The other observation I noticed at this year's conference as well is there's a acceleration of partnerships. I've seen that happening. So companies are trying to fill in, I think, the gaps that they have to get ultimately towards what you mentioned, Rosie, this one integrated approach, or that we spoke about, this iPaaS approach. And they're trying to do it by stitching different opportunities together. So Oro has what I noticed recently called their open network. And, that is companies that they're bringing in because, perhaps they focus mainly on intake and orchestration, but other companies want to do bidding. They want to do all those kind of different things. And they're kind of stitching that all together. What's going to be interesting to see what happens is how easily can those lines be blurred. So it's really not the same thing as just going out to 7 or 8 different companies, but it's really like going to one company. I think that's going to tell how successful that is or not.
Yes, and I suppose different ways of working are important in different ways to people. And so just talking a little bit about AI negotiation, because I think one thing that surprised me, it was my first time at DPW. One of my colleagues had been to New York, and I saw so many people saying that they did AI negotiation, and I think this could apply to any subsection of the DPW of the procurement tech world. Is they all have the same headline and they all say they do something different, and this is obviously a world I'm steeped in. And as I went round, I realized everybody does it differently, right? Like the interpretation of what you do is so different. And I spoke to one person who said, yes, we knew we needed an AI negotiation partner, but we spoke to 10 different people till we worked out what we needed because everyone did something different. And I
Right.
think that might be one of the complexities is with those 420 people that poor James Mead is following, they all sort of have the same headings, but actually what they achieve is slightly different.
Yeah, no, it's a really good observation. I would say that's another thought is that what the companies in many cases say they do and what they actually do when you use it sometimes can be a pretty good gap. And some are selling futures, they're selling their roadmap, and others are, here today doing that kind of work. And I think when I talk about this sort of iPaaS thing, in terms of integrated platforms, they also have to be flexible so that they can be configured in a bespoke fashion as well, because no two entities handle everything the same. And that's really possible now. The idea of being able to scale something in a bespoke fashion can actually happen today with the tools that are out there. And that's what's so exciting. But if your platform is not built on those tools, it's built on something from, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it's going to be a really big challenge for you to keep up. And, OpenAI releases, ChatGPT 5 or 6 coming out in 26. I think hundreds of businesses go out of business when those get released. But I also think that because there's such rapid, innovation in this area, that many CPOs and chief supply chain officers and so on are sitting on the sidelines waiting for that easy button. So they're waiting for the easy button to come out, and they're also concerned that they're going to make the wrong decision. So it's kind of stifling them. And my feeling is the biggest cost that anybody's ever going to incur in this time frame right now, I don't care what business you're in, is the cost of doing nothing. So you really need to embrace this and start with something or else sitting on the sidelines is not going to be a recipe for success.
It's an interesting point because then you earlier said there's a second mover advantage here, right? Like the what you could have achieved 2 years ago, you pioneered AI negotiations a couple of years ago, and what you can achieve now is completely different. So there's there's that fear of being the first mover and knowing that the second mover has the advantage that's making you stop. But then there's the cost of doing nothing, right? Like
Yes,
it's a real conundrum, isn't it?
it is.
I suppose then you want to be a fast follower. So where would you be a fast follower? What did you see that you thought, that's pretty cool. If I was the CPO with a blank sheet of paper, those are the places I would be a fast follower. Where are the places where you think you have that second mover advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's most of those applications that are sort of AI native when I say that, meaning not AI powered, not AI branded, not a, label on top of ChatGPT, or a wrapper. It's something that's truly integrated in that fashion. And again, as I said before, some of these applications that can build apps. So in other words, the idea of an LLM putting words in and getting a category strategy of 25 pages of words, that doesn't do much for me anymore. What I would like to see, and I'm seeing this in very limited companies now, is it for it to go ahead and build that application and have it integrate with one data layer. Because one thing that hasn't changed now and for forever is data is really still the foundation of everything. And there were a number of different presentations that spoke about that at DPW. But data is not this big, scary thing anymore in the way that you can get after unstructured data now with some of the new
Yes.
tools that are out there.
Yeah,
So
you
I,
don't need to kind of clean it up to the same extent, do you? Right?
yes,
You can use messy data or slightly incorrect data, and you can still get pretty good insights out of it.
right. And now I know some of the data idealists will say, no, no, it all has to be perfect, and I get that. But it shouldn't be a reason for you not to start. And a lot of times companies will use that as the reason. Well, we don't have our arms around the data or whatever it might be. But some things never change in any of these eras. Whatever environment we're in of the Industrial Revolution, garbage in, garbage out, right? So that's never going to change. But you really need to get at, sort of the plumbing in that whole area that you've got to go after and say, I need to get this data working for me because data is the key. I mean, I know what really got me um, interested in this area, a while back, is I remember I saw an article in The Economist in 2017. It actually was. I went back and looked it up, and it said that oil, so data has surpassed oil as the most important commodity in the world right now, right? And that's what it's all about. Data is more important than oil in terms of that regard, and that's what everybody has to look at. So the data is important, but at the same time, sitting on the sidelines and doing nothing is not a solution as well. So you're right. It's a bit of a conundrum, but on the negotiation side, there's a lot that's being done there. I actually see two things happening there. I see these tools are good enough now to involve direct materials. So I see a big momentum going around attacking direct materials as well, because that's 80+% of your spend. Most companies are talking about tail spend, they're talking about indirect materials. That's great, but that was easier to get at before. Now with the advent of these tools, direct materials are there. And what's funny is, and this is interesting, I see reverse auctions coming back in some ways.
Go on, talk me through that. So why is that?
I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, I think I know why it is because people are getting smarter around reverse auctions. There's other ways to do reverse auctions that involve total cost of ownership, not just price. Because the only way to do a real effective reverse auction, in my opinion, if it's strictly price, is it has to be a commodity that you can
It
compare
has to be all exactly the
exact,
same. Yeah.
right? And you don't usually see that. But there are so many other different types of auctions that are out there now. They've been out there, but now they can be, automated and so forth, that I see people using those as well. So there's a number of things that have come back in the mix. Game theory, being able to incorporate game theory in negotiations and so on. I think it's going to be very interesting to see where it all goes because you probably see in your own business, you weren't the first, I don't think, a company that's doing what you're doing, but it's making everybody better. So when there's enough business out there to satisfy everybody, but it does make everybody better when there's competition out there. So direct materials are now, I think, squarely in the center of what people can look at negotiating online as well.
And that classically then becomes a one-to-many conversation as well, right? Like where you can have
Yes.
multiple conversations where in the old days you might have asked 30 people to quote, but you'd certainly never have negotiated an outcome with more than the top three. Whereas now actually you can take all 30 through to late stages in the process because
Yes.
it's not difficult to have 30 conversations at the same time.
But you bring up an excellent point there. I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of the tools, let's say 3 or 4 years ago that we were using, they really only negotiated one to one, not one to many. So they were very good for terms and conditions. So let's say you were negotiating working capital or trying to increase terms. Usually you don't have to have multiple suppliers involved for you to improve your terms. You just need to talk to that one supplier. And if that one supplier gets and meets the metrics you're looking for, you can close the deal. But when it comes to one to many, and I've been talking to companies about this for a while, and it needs to be addressed, is especially in direct materials, you may have 5 suppliers that are bidding for this business. You can't be in one room alone and only talk to one supplier, so to speak, and know whether to award the business to them or not, because there's 5 other rooms that are going on at the same time. So you have
Yeah,
to be able to adapt it.
we see this a bit like having a WhatsApp chat, if I can put it that way. So each supplier feels like they're having a WhatsApp chat with you. And you know how, sometimes you'll both be there at the same time and you'll see the dots saying, David is typing, Rosie is typing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then sometimes you'll just send me a message when you know I'm not around and ask me to pick it up when I can, if that makes sense. And we see that's exactly what the one-to-many will feel like. So for each supplier to procurement person, it'll feel like a one-to-one conversation, but it won't have that sense of urgency that needs to be completed in its entirety right now. And so as a result, you'll be able to have that conversation simultaneously with 6 suppliers in different time zones, maybe over the course of 48 hours. And then you'll be able to then use the feedback from each conversation as it emerges. And you'll also be able to reward suppliers who deal with you quickly, right? Like, supplier might say, look, I'm ready to sign the deal. I don't want to wait another 36 hours for you to kind of have everyone else's feedback. And actually, you can choose to close the whole thing there if you feel that that is a good place to fund the agreement. So we see that emerging that. But it's funny actually, because we were debating this we have a professor of negotiation who's a senior advisor at Nibble, and we were debating this approach because it's very clean and it feels very fair. And I think it would build good relationships with these commodity suppliers. But you would lose that sense of rounds, that sense of my round 1 bid and my round 2 bid.
right.
And is there part of game theory that says you'd lose some of the pressure that you can put on the different suppliers to get a great outcome, and that's where it comes back to,
Yeah.
huge amounts of game theory and psychology. But the other advantage you have is once you start automating things, you have the data and you can conduct it how you see fit. Do you see what I mean? You can close it quickly if you're still getting great outcomes, and if you're not, you can start putting rounds in and you've got complete transparency of what's working and what's not.
No, it's a great point. And I would say one of the things we probably all should think about is what is a great outcome? A great outcome isn't necessarily the lowest price, right? And I think these tools are also allowing us to really dig into total cost of ownership. There was a couple of companies at DPW. I think one of the startup companies that won the award was, I think, all around should cost modeling, right? And what should what should the cost be of that particular item? And that's always been the holy grail sometimes, right? Because when you start talking about anchor pricing, it's always nice to anchor, to be the first company that anchors, but you better know your market if you anchor, or you're going to be negotiating with yourself. So it is always best to have that information. We talked about the information's available out there. You just have to kind of go and get it. But when it comes to the negotiation, I think now it's much more about total cost of ownership. But I would also say, if you look at, Deloitte 25 CPO survey and so on, the most important thing, I think, if you talk to a lot of my colleagues, is continuity of supply. It's
Yeah.
not just price,
Security.
security. And now there's three things that you can never, let your guard down on, right? Privacy, security, and risk. And I saw a lot of risk solutions at DPW as well. I've seen some
Mm.
resilience hubs that are really, really creative that get you ahead of what's going on from a risk standpoint. I think those are essential because, I heard it put one time, it's kind of interesting. People might say, what does AI do for risk? Well, it's almost like the best way I like to think about it is, risk doesn't normally knock on your front door. It's normally sneaks around the back and goes in the back door. And AI can be your guard dog that watches that 24/7 to make sure it's not sneaking around the back. And that's basically what you need to do when you need to have these working 24/7. So some people say, oh, I wake up in the morning and I handle all the problems. Well, you can't do that anymore. It's got to be handled at 2 in the morning. So I think the
Yeah.
ultimate, in my opinion, the ultimate that we're all searching for is the self-healing supply chain. You want it to be able to heal itself, in the middle of the night and not wait for you in the morning to make a change or make a move and it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I guess for things you repeatedly order for commodity buys where there should be enough information in there about how much you need and when you
Sure.
need it. That should be self-healing. That should be possible. That doesn't strike me as too hard.
Yeah.
Um,
And when I say self-healing, I'm talking like maybe there's a disruption in the supply of something in the it's coming through the Suez Canal and that's blocked, so it needs to be rerouted. It shouldn't be like waiting for a human to say, should I reroute it? Well,
yeah.
if the information's in there, you have to have it for a customer and it needs to be delivered on time. Yeah, it needs to be rerouted. And why wait and lose a half a day for it to be rerouted? So there is the human in the loop is still really important, but it's the humans that are going to design these advanced systems that allow companies to really operate more efficiently. It's the tier two, the tier three supply chains that people are going to really have to dig into because you're only as good as the supply chain that you control. But if your suppliers have a supply chain that they have to control, you need to help them control that as well on your behalf.
And I suppose this is where you talk about risk and cyber tools and management, because the current systems can absorb so much more data and it can be quite unstructured, but they can still look for anomalies and risks,
Yes.
even if you haven't said exactly what you're looking for. That I think is a huge advantage in just the way things like LLMs work. It's just much better at absorbing tons and tons of data and flagging up places where you may want to dig in deeper.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about predictive analytics, and it can
Yeah.
potentially predict something from as you mentioned, the massive data that it's looking at. There are organizations I'm working with now that they have so much data they can actually predict shortages in certain materials that are coming. And if they can do that and give you a signal, then maybe you'll place your order earlier than you normally would,
Yeah.
and give more lead time than you would have in the past.
Yeah, that I can see that being really useful. And one of my private frustrations with this wage of technology is sometimes it's unexplainable. But this is a situation where it doesn't really matter that it's unexplainable. It's just giving you some ideas of the risks that you might want to manage, right? Rather than actions that must be taken.
Sure.
Fascinating. And we talked at the beginning about how we were going to talk about where we're at today and where you see the future. And I know you'd had some ideas, and I'm conscious we've taken a varied path through our conversation. Is there anything I've forgotten to ask you about that you were thinking before we started on the call that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, I think there's a tremendous amount of action now happening in the space, which is great, right? I don't think it's enough to go to these meetings and so on and just talk about what's possible. I think people are now talking about what they've done and what they've been successful in. We built some AI somewhat on the agentic side of looking at my calendar, seeing when I have a meeting with a large supplier, backs it up 10 days from there, looks up their 10K, the quarterly report, any news items, and sends a summary to the team before the supplier comes in. And then we've seen that we've met. That's very simple to do. We've met with the suppliers and we know a lot more about their company than the supplier even knows.
It's
So
interesting,
it's
isn't
very
it?
helpful.
And also from that point of view, something that we didn't talk about that much at DPW, they had one of these walls where you put, I think AI will destroy jobs or improve efficiency, save costs. You know what I mean? And one of them was improve supplier relationships. And no one had put any blobs there until I went along and put my blob there. But it is quite interesting because actually that sort of preparation allows you to go into that meeting and be much more empathetic. And
Yeah,
whilst
no,
you may be going in to get, the terms that you think you deserve or make sure that you don't get sort of blindsided by something. But at the same time, to go in well briefed is it's just
true.
etiquette. It's human relationship building.
100%. And I think what people forget sometimes is a win-win isn't when one side wins twice. That's not a win-win. And you have to be really careful with your supplier base because it's sensitive. So if you say, "Oh, I'm going to do this reverse auction. I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm going to squeeze every little dime out of it that I can, and we'll see what happens." Well, let's say it doesn't work out. Those suppliers might not be your advocates in the future. And all of a sudden you've damaged your supplier base, which is extremely critical, for your success in the future. So, I think we have to go back to, what is a real win-win? And I think that's important. And then sort of that old Harvard negotiation model of BATNA, a best alternative to the negotiated agreement. You need to assess what is your best alternative that if you do not come to an agreement, and that will tell you what, where you can be in terms of your most desired outcome or your least acceptable alternative. That's really important. And people might know what those terms are, but they don't do that preparation
They
beforehand.
forget to, yeah, they
I think
forget
it's
to
wrong.
really, you do have to really drill in, right? And the other tip I've got is you can practice out loud now, right? Like, so you can put ChatGPT on your phone on, and you
Yes.
can actually practice out loud, and that makes such a difference.
You're
Thanks so much, David. And just to finish off, a few rapid fire questions to get your off the cuff viewpoint. So I've got five of them. Here they come. Number one, what's the most overhyped term you would ban from procurement forever?
Yeah, probably the most overhyped term in the interim right now is maybe AI native. A lot of people now are talking about AI native, and there's a lot of different, definitions around that, and claiming to be AI native, and whether we are or not. I think the proof's in the pudding. So probably the sort of AI native discussion that everybody is claiming to be AI native in their technology stack.
It's a bit like saying I use computers, isn't it? Um, so my next one, what's your most useful AI tool in your own workflow right now?
Yeah, I use a tool that I thought a lot of people were aware of, but as I talk to people, maybe they're not. It's actually called Notebook LM. And it is extremely valuable in this environment we're in now, where there's so much information coming at us. And you bookmark it to read later, and maybe you don't read it later. What's so unique about this tool from Google actually is that you can upload up to 50 different articles, YouTube videos, websites, whatever it might be. And believe it or not, most people say, "Oh, it probably gives you an executive summary." No, it does one better. It actually develops a 15 to 20 minute, in some cases maybe shorter, professional podcast of everything that was put in. So what's amazing about it is it allows me and others, when you're walking the dog, or you're in the gym, or in the morning on your way to work, or you're in the car, you can actually listen to a podcast of only what you uploaded. No LLMs where it's going out for other information. So whatever you have, you can upload it, and it's an amazing podcast that gives you some terrific information. Really helps me absorb the enormity of information that's going around today about AI.
It's amazing. I do love that. That is fun.
Yeah,
You're right. I'm
very
going to go
good.
away and download that and hope it doesn't put me out of business, to be perfectly honest. Um, so question three, automation or intelligence, which matters more?
Intelligence, because if you automate a process that's not ideal anyways, that doesn't really get you anywhere. So I think it's intelligence. It's that human in the loop that's still very important. But hopefully this era of what we're doing is going to get most of us back on the side of intelligence and strategy, so that we can make the biggest impact to our businesses.
Amazing. And the best one-liner you heard at DPW?
Best one liner. don't know if I heard an actual one-liner, but I might sum it up as opinion masquerading as fact. I think there's a tremendous amount of opinion that's masquerading as fact right now. And that is one of the biggest lethal items in business today, not just in AI, not just in procurement, but we get in these meetings and a lot of people will state opinions as so they're fact. And if you don't dig into the data, you end up going down the road. And if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So I think we have to all be careful about opinion masquerading as fact.
I love that. I love that. I talk a lot about asking the right questions and drilling into the second layer of questions. And it's all to do with trying to get through that sort of veil, if that makes sense. I love that line. I'm going to use that myself, I think.
Sure.
So my very last rapid fire question, what's your negotiation superpower?
Yeah, I think if I had to sum it up, I would say the superpower is still human to human in many ways when it becomes very strategic. And I think it's humor. And when I say that, I think it unlocks a lot of folks to be more genuine. And when I say humor, I want to be specific because someone did say to me one time, I'm glad you asked that, David, you're not a comedian because a comedian says two guys walked into a bar and then continue on. You're a humorist. They said, because you say things that are funny, but there's meaning behind them. So I was taught a long time ago from my mother, may she rest in peace, that many a truth is said in jest. So I think, that this idea about being a humorist, which they called me, which I didn't know what it was, but when they defined it, I was happy to be called that, is you say things that are funny, but you have meaning behind them. And I think it unlocks a lot of conversation and you end up in a win-win because too many people in today's environment think a win-win is when they win twice. And that's not what it is.
I've not heard that expression before either. A win-win being when you win twice is not, it's not a win-win negotiation, is it? Do you know,
Yeah.
funnily enough, we've always had a little bit of humor in Nibble, and some people find it a little uncomfortable, but it does get you there because actually, particularly in the AI to human world, the AI can't get cross because the human doesn't care about the AI's feelings, right? So in a human to human world, if you make the other side cross or angry or sad, you care a little bit or a lot, depending your relationship. But in the AI world, you just don't care. And humor actually replaces those uncomfortable moments quite effectively. It's quite a different world.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's nice. It's exciting that you're considering that in the development of your whole, technology approach to negotiation.
Fascinating. Well, that was honestly the best rapid fire questions I could ever have hoped for. And David, you completely lived up to my very, very high expectations today. So it just serves for me to say thank you very, very much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
And thanks for having me. And I always learn a lot myself, from folks like you, and I'm sure others that when we'll discuss many of the new things that are happening in the marketplace. It is really a privilege, I think, to be able to not have to work in this environment, but to get it to work in this environment today with all the exciting things that are happening. So thanks again, Rosie. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening today to AI Negotiation Unlocked. If you're ready to take the next step in transforming your business operations and scaling your negotiations with AI, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Want to learn more about how Nibble can empower your business? Visit us at nibbletechnology.com or follow us on social media for updates and insights. Stay curious, keep innovating, and we'll see you next time on AI Negotiation Unlocked.